Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. Today's guest, Brad Stevens, knows a thing or two about reinventing your career. He's made the jump from mid-major college coach to NBA coach to NBA front office executive. Today, Brad is the president of basketball operations for the Boston Celtics after spending 8 seasons as the team's head coach. As head coach, he led the Celtics to 3 appearances in the Eastern Conference Finals and 7 straight trips to the playoffs. Before joining the Celtics, he coached at Butler University, where he led the Bulldogs to 2 appearances in the national championship game. In our conversation today, we talk about finding contentment in the pursuit, the qualities he looks for in hiring, and his advice for young leaders. Let's jump right in. Here's my conversation with Brad Stevens. Well, Brad Stevens, it's a treat to have you on. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me, Molly. I've gotten a chance to listen to a couple of different podcasts over the years and appreciate the work that you do.
Well, you're kind. Well, I want to start with your coaching career. You know, at what point did you realize that this was something that you really wanted to pursue?
You know what? It's funny. I said all the way through my coaching career to everybody that was still playing, play as long as you can because it's not as fun as playing, right? So, but eventually for all of us, our time runs short. For me, that time came after college and, obviously very predictable when you're a Division III level player that you better start figuring out what's next in your life. I was fortunate to secure a job when I was a junior at Eli Lilly, but during my senior year, even before I started full time at Lilly after my senior year in marketing, I, was starting to realize that I wanted to try to stay in and around the game. The best way obviously seemed to be coaching. I had a lot of contacts from working camps and from playing in Central Indiana my entire career. And I was fortunate that one of those contacts was Thad Matta, who had just been recently named the head coach at Butler. So he was kind enough to let me give up my full-time job for a volunteer job and kind of start out on this path. But I think that the ultimate driver for me was being in and around the game. I felt like sitting in a room, even though, obviously, a pharmaceutical company has to compete with the other companies that they are all trying to beat to the punch with creating their drugs or selling their drugs or whatever the case may be. I really missed having a scoreboard. I missed the competition. And I really missed the intimacy of team. And so, and that was just in 9 months. And so it was pretty obvious that I was going to take a leap and try it. I was just fortunate to do it at the right place in Butler.
Sure. No question. Which was a harder transition for you, college to the NBA or to an NBA coach or to the NBA front office?
It's interesting. They're all, they've all been really tough. I would go in order from going from the pharmaceutical industry to being a volunteer and being in my first coaches meeting. Okay. I'll never forget when the first coaches meeting I was in, had Mike Marshall was a former player at Butler, John Gross, who's now the head coach at Akron, Todd Licklider, who's the head coach at Evansville and has been at Iowa and was head coach at Butler as well at one time. Thad Matta was the head coach at Butler at the time. So there was a lot of people that knew a lot about basketball in that room and had already lived it. I had played my whole life, but when I walked out of that meeting, I said to myself, I don't know anything about coaching. I had a long, steep curve ahead because it's so different thinking, as a player and getting through that next day's practice and then being responsible for planning it and making sure it flows smoothly for the entire team and organization, and then all the other things that go along with that. So that transition was really significant. The good news is I didn't have hardly any responsibility, and so I got to make it at my own pace, and I just latched on to the expertise of those in that room. And then I'd say transitioning from being an assistant to the head coach at Butler was probably the easiest of the 4 transitions because, I had been there every day. I knew the players. I'd recruited a lot of them. We were able to keep continuity in the staff. I knew everybody well that I was working with, and we had 5 seniors who could have done it without me. And so I think that ultimately was, the weight of that responsibility. You could feel the difference in moving down 12 inches. But as far as calling timeouts and drawing up plays and those type of things, I was well prepared to do that by standing next to Todd Licklider and learning from him for 6 years, and the freedom that he gave us in practice. Moving to Boston from Butler, I don't think there's any question was the hardest. That was the emotional toll of leaving a place that you had been there for 13 years and the relationships that, still to this day mean so much to us, and really wading into the unknown, right? When you've lived in Indianapolis your whole life and you move out east to Boston, it's a brand new world. But it was made easier by the fact that Danny Ainge just said, and do this how you want to do this. We're here to support you, and we realize it's not going to be without its hiccups and bumps. It's a hard transition. And I think that's the difference between my experience, coaching in the NBA for 8 years and other college coaches who just didn't get that kind of leeway. It just didn't. And it is an emotional thing to have 82 games, to have people reacting to all 82 games, and to somehow manage to stay the course as an organization. And I credit Danny and our ownership and everybody else that is able to see the big picture all the time while rooting with great invested emotion in the moment. And then this transition, the first couple of months, I would say, all the way through the end of free agency this year was just constant, nonstop.
Firehouse.
Yeah, way different than going from an assistant at Butler to the head coach at Butler, because I was doing the same things.
Mm-hmm.
This is more like, I tell my friends in college, this is more like an athletic director, right? This is more like you're responsible for everything. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's no way that I could have made this transition without the expertise that we have at so many other levels outside of our basketball team. The front office expertise we already have in the building, the sports science and training, the people that know how to handle the day-to-day ins and outs of this. There's so many things, data and analytics, that I could point to that have made this easier, but it's because we already had a ton of great people in place, and I've gotten a greater appreciation for how much they were doing behind the scenes when I was coaching.
Was there some advice that you got inside of these transitions that really proved helpful to you, that you would say, boy, that really helped me? I leaned into that a lot, and it helped me inside of any of these transitions that you've experienced over the last, several years?
Well, I think that the number one piece of advice, anytime somebody asks me what my leadership style would be, I just say it's me. I grew up in an era where Coach Knight and Coach Katie were coaching in the state of Indiana, and it was like they're on you all the time. And that's what leadership looked like in the eyes of a 1990s Indiana kid,
mm-hmm.
right? And what I grew up to realize is everyone has to do it their own way. And so the best advice I've ever gotten is just be yourself. From transitioning to the head coach at Butler, to transitioning to the head coach of the Celtics, transitioning to the president of the basketball operations of Celtics, I've always told myself, just be yourself. If it's not good enough, then that's okay. And make sure that, losing games is one thing, but treating people right and making sure that you're doing your best to, represent your organization well at all times is the most important thing.
Absolutely. I heard from a mutual friend of ours that when you got to Boston, Belichick gave you some advice on what it looks like in New England. I'm just curious what he shared with you when you got to Boston.
First of all, he's been great to me, and I didn't hear from him for a few months. But supposedly, he said he was trying to get a hold of me on my old Butler number. So, anyways, this is a fun Belichick story. So they're getting ready to play the Colts, and I don't remember if it was or if it was a regular season game or a playoff game, and I get asked about it, and like I've been a Colts fan my whole life, but I also have moved to New England, so I know how crazy that fan base is, and so I really towed the line in just a blah answer, totally like, both organizations are great, unbelievable how similar they are. I totally towed the line, and later on, I ultimately end up getting a text from Belichick, and it's super kind, big fan of what you did at Butler, big fan of the steps that you guys are going to take with the Celtics. And I just want you to know that all of us here at Patriots Place are Celtics fans. And I'll never forget that, because it was like, yeah, I got to be a Pats fan. I'm all in. So from that point on, I have made every friend in Indianapolis mad. And I realized, like, when you're in New England, you jump in with New England. You jump in 2 feet. You are a Patriots fan. I sat on the Green Monster the other night, Bruins fan. It is such a blast to be a professional sports fan in Boston. And I'm glad Coach Belichick gave me that advice right from the get-go.
Obviously, your new role is president of basketball operations. As you said, you've been drinking from a fire hose. What have been some of your top priorities when you stepped into that role?
Number one was we were going to try our best to help the people that were going to have the most anxiety and not knowing where their next steps were, specifically my coaching staff. And we had an unbelievable staff. They had done nothing but have success for the last, so many years together. Several of us were together all 8 years. And so it was important to me whether they stayed here in Boston with our staff or decided to move on to other coaching opportunities and other staffs, that we tried to work and do our best to help appropriately. The good news is the rest of we didn't have to make any changes anywhere else. So the most important thing was to, number one, hire a new head coach and then let him dictate who he wanted to hire on his staff. He did end up keeping quite a few of our people that were already there. The second thing was, how do we improve our team? And those are kind of working together in concert. How do we improve our team to set us up to be the best that we can be now, but also to be very mindful of our, where we are within, the cap and other things that become very complicated in all of this for the future. And then the third thing was just evaluate and see around me in the front office and in the analytics and in the organizational growth and the training and all those areas where we needed to become more robust or where we needed to improve. And that's what I said. Like, I've been so impressed with the incredible work that people have done. I always knew they were good, but I've been even more, I feel even more confident that this group, we just need to become more robust in the areas where we can take some off the plate of some of our people so that they can be even more able to operate as efficiently and streamlined as possible, because we have very talented people here.
When you were hiring a head coach, what was I'm curious as to your process, right? What were some of the criteria, the most important criteria that you wanted to ensure was inside of the person that came in?
The 3 qualities that I've always looked for when hiring an assistant coach are humble, intelligent, and hardworking. And so it was the exact same when hiring a head coach. One of the things, and I interviewed a ton of great people, and I feel very strongly that really couldn't have gone wrong. That there are so many good candidates out there and so many good people. But Ime, to me, was super special in his understanding, his experience, but then also his humility. He was very easy from the first minute you meet him. He's just a very easy person to talk to, so approachable, has a great way with people, has been through a lot, on his way to being a player in the NBA and on his path and journey as a coach, and has worked with and around some of the great players and coaches in the game. And so those were the things that I'd always look for. And I just think that that's so important. This is the ability to stay even through all of this, be thankful through all of this. I do think takes a humility, because it comes at you like a million miles an hour. And you just have to be able to navigate that with some perspective. And so I hope, from my seat, that if I can provide him with anything, then I hope it's just support during the times where it feels like, it's as crazy as ever.
Well, I know humble is a word that is attached to a description of you, which is awesome, of course, and that's how so many people describe you. So he's a lucky man to have you as his guide. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk a little bit about your approach to building a team. What's the process like when you're evaluating, whether or not somebody is the right fit, right? I'm sure it's humble, hardworking, and intelligent too at some level, right? But what are the other things that you really ensure are threaded inside of that process when you're forming a cohesive team?
First of all, everybody that is in the building impacts the team, right? So I think that that's really important. Everybody pulling in one direction and sharing results is really important. I mean, I think how many times do you hear stories about, just from a team standpoint, and let's use college as an example, an athletic director doesn't get along with their head coach, who doesn't get along with the assistants, who doesn't get along with the trainer, who, whatever the case may be. How do you expect your team to be good? Like, there's no chance if everyone in those roles can't see eye to eye and can't agree, can't walk out of a room after debating something and decide on a course of action and be committed to it, then how can we expect our team to do so as we're going through a pick and roll coverage or a downscreen coverage? And so I think it starts with everyone making the main thing, everyone being able to, do their job and embrace their role and focus on that as well as they can. From a basketball perspective, obviously, again, you're talking within the limitations of a cap. You're talking within the limitations of some, very complicated number crunching. But I do think that one of the things that we have is we just have a limited pool to choose from, because there are only so many people that athletically can handle this level. It is a super small number,
right?
And it's small at Butler,
yeah,
but it's like super small here. And so I believe strongly in competitive character, people that will prepare well, people that care about their team, and when the lights are on, can focus on their task and do their job well, regardless of circumstance. And I think that that's really hard. And so it's not for everyone. If you can have a few leaders in your locker room that get that can exhibit that, then you're well on your way to being excellent.
Yeah.
Because that trickles down from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's control the controllables, right? Be where your feet are, as Saban says so often. I love what you said, though, competitive character. Tell me about that.
Well, I just think, we all throw around the term character and don't really define it, right? So for us at Butler, we had values on the wall that we all said, okay, this is how we're going to make decisions. This is what we're going to recruit to. We're going to talk about these in the recruiting process. People are going to know what we're about. And so that when they get here, there's no surprises. And at the same time, we want all these nice qualities and all these things that are like, that you want from anybody,
sure,
in any organization at any time. But we also want like a drive, and we also want a desire and a willingness to compete, because we are in a competitive business. Like, it's hard to be in the playoffs. You have to be better than 7 other NBA teams in your conference, right? And all of them have the resources, people, and talent to be where they ultimately, to be there. So it's very, very difficult. So I think being able to have all those great human qualities and individual qualities while at the same time being able to compete is really, really important.
I've had Angela Duckworth on the podcast. We talked about that briefly before we hit record, but who I know and whose work I know you're familiar with and admire. Once you get to the level that you're at, right, how does growth mindset really show up and matter in the work that you do? Because is it just what got them there, or is it what keeps them there, the growth mindset?
I think every single day it becomes even more of the focus, even more of why you do what you do, even more of why you want to do it. I've been a part of a lot of teams that were in the last 4 teams standing over the last 14 years as a head coach. But I've never won a championship at the NCAA level or the NBA level. But I've talked to several people who have several of those. And it's funny, they all talk about, like, the next day still, the sun comes up the next day, and then you can only celebrate it so long.
Right, totally.
And then it's about, is it about what you've done or what you are, or who you are, or what you're going to accomplish next, or what you're going to focus on. And I just think, like, if you're, if you put all of your identity, all of your focus on that one thing, well, you might get there, right? But then the next day happens. And so that's, to me, the whole point is everybody talks about growth mindset, and I think usually do it through terms of adversity and let's get better through this time and just focus on get better. We know we failed. I think it's just as important when you're rolling and when you're having success, because it keeps you grounded and forward looking.
Yeah, to me, and you said the word drive, which I love, right? To me, it's a little bit of not the drive to achieve, right? But the daily drive to get better is what I feel like keeps them. I mean, it's one thing to, I always used to say to my draft guys, it's one thing to get drafted. It's a whole nother thing to stay there. Drive will keep you there. Talent might give you an opportunity, but drive will keep you there for sure.
Draft night is such a big night for a lot of kids and families.
Sure.
And I always just hope, and I say this usually when they come in after we draft them, I don't want that to be your highlight.
Right. Totally.
Because it is so hard. Draft, everybody's celebrating the draft, talking about all the great things guys can do. Well, now you got to do it against LeBron.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, the guys in those highlights that you were doing it against were not him.
Exactly.
So that's just it's a different level. And you have to have something beyond just, the physical. You have to have something beyond even the skill to separate yourself as being, as having a chance to be special. We're fortunate because we've had some really good players here over the course of time, and that I've been here even, and certainly before that, we have some of the greatest to ever play the game. But we always use the phrase that special isn't for everyone. And I think being able to stay in the moment and working every day to improve is a big part of it.
In just a second, we'll get back to the conversation. But first, I want to share some exciting news. My new TED Talk is out now, and it's all about the secrets to a champion mindset. For more than 15 years as a sports agent, I had a front row seat to peak performance. What was the difference between those who maximize their potential and those who don't? You think it's talent, but it's really drive. And the real magic happens when the drive to achieve is replaced by something more sustainable, the drive to get better. The best know this, that the view from the summit is nice, but it's the climb that makes it all worthwhile. Check it out. Watch it now at mollyfletcher.com/TED Talk.
This sort of I've never arrived mindset, right? This pursuit of getting better, this consistent drive, I've heard you say, finding contentment in the pursuit, you say. I love it. Can you coach to that? Can you teach that? And how do you do that?
I think so. I always talked about, even through our Butler runs, that I didn't want those. Again, we talked about the next day. If we win, what's the next day going to be like? How are we going to act? What are we going to be committed to? How will this experience, win or lose, help move us forward and move us along and make us better? And I think that is a huge part of it. Again, I think it's all of those experiences when you're in the locker room every day, where you're watching film, where you're back on the court, where you're teaching, where you're coaching, where you're receiving feedback as a player, are all hopefully steps to achieve what you want to achieve from a goal standpoint. But the reality is it's that process and that journey which kind of forges the relationships and forms a commitment to one another that is really bigger than whatever the outcome is, and why you ultimately do it. I was talking to a friend of mine who retired from coaching a few years ago, and he said, when I was in the middle of it, all I could think about were the losses, and it kept me up at night, and it drove me crazy, and it probably drove us to improving, but it was unhealthy, right? And he said, when I got out of it, all I can remember are the great times, the wins, and the people. And it's so interesting why we can't have that mindset in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because I think that's truly what makes it special.
Right, leaning into those special moments. And it's that fine line though, right? Between enjoying the moments, but recognizing that the sun's coming up tomorrow and you got to continue to get better.
That's why your greatest joy you find in your work with your peers and your work with your teammates and being on a team and being a part of a team. I think that's one of the great privileges of playing sports.
You've made some career decisions that require taking a pretty big leap, right? Leaving the corporate world for coaching, going to the NBA, now moving to the front office. What's your approach to navigating these types of tough decisions when it comes to your career?
Well, I've been fortunate because I've only lived in two places since I started my coaching career, right? Lived in Indianapolis and now living in Boston. And so we, from a family perspective, it's been about as ideal as you could ever have it when you get into coaching 22 years ago. So I would say that I'm very slow to make decisions like that, very deliberate. I learned that from Todd Licklider, who was my boss at Butler for 6 years. I just think making a hasty decision is not appropriate in those moments, right? And so, I've usually go back and forth. I only can talk to a couple of people because of the confidentiality of the last few moves. And so I'd say my number one advisor, without question, is my wife. And there's not even a person close to second. We just talk through. We start at a place of our family and where we are with regard to our kids and how they are and how, we can, navigate this in an appropriate way that makes sense for all of us. And so we have those discussions and come to a decision and then jump in with 2 feet. I think that's the only way you can do it.
I love it. I know you're a huge family guy. And by the way, I heard your wife is actually the better athlete. Can you validate that, man?
Well, she is. She might be the better coach too. She's a heck of a coach. She's coached my daughter all the way up through her soccer, and it's fun to see her poring over her rotations the night before a seventh grade
awesome.
soccer
game. Oh, that's cool. I love it. Those mean a lot. That's awesome. She seems like a rock star.
She is.
At 30, you became a D1 college coach, right? At 36, you were named the Celtics head coach. What advice do you give young leaders?
I think, again, be yourself, number one. You were ultimately hired or put in that position for a reason, even if you have doubts yourself, if you're not confident. Be invested in the people that are there and make sure that, it's very obvious that you care about their growth and you care about, where they want to go in this big journey. And then, do your best to, live, exhibit, embrace, and hold to the standards that, your organization has in place. That's one of the hard parts, right? Is when you go from being an assistant coach to the head coach, then you go from being the person that people can complain to the person that people will complain about if you're tough on the standards, if you're tough on those types of things. And so I haven't been perfect in my 14 years as a head coach. And there are certainly moments that I would love to redo and do better. But I have always tried to start from a foundation of being myself and thinking about each and every decision to a level that there's a reason why you choose to do or not do something.
We've talked about this word a bit, and so many people describe you as incredibly humble. How do you balance both the humility and then marry it with the confidence and the authority that you need to have to navigate, at the highest level of sports, so many big decisions where there's, of course, a ton of egos?
My favorite interviews to listen to are the long-winded responses to why I'm so humble. So I'll avoid that part. That's somebody else's decision to make. I'm probably not as humble as everybody thinks, but I appreciate the kind words. The way that I gleaned confidence in coaching, and the way that I'm sure I'll glean confidence in this new job is just being as prepared as I can. So it just was a lot of work. It was extra film, extra time spent trying to focus on any situation that might appear in a game or a season that we needed to be prepared for. And so, I think that's what it takes, right? My friend of mine just said the magic is in the work. And I think that in coaching, you have to figure out where your diminishing point of returns are with that work. But if you don't do the minimal amount, you have no chance. You don't have to be in the office from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. every day. You can do it other places, but there's a minimal amount that you've got to figure out. But there is also a diminishing point of returns where you need to, and I say this all the time, you need to figure out what's too much. Which film do you not need to watch so that you can go exercise, go out to eat with your family, do something that gets your mind completely off of it. Those are really important things too, but you can't do that all the time. you have to do the work.
It's so key, right? I mean, you can't go into the gym for 2 weeks straight and come out repped, right? You got to eat and drink water and sleep. And
I tell our front office staff this now, there's no expectation that they hold traditional hours, right? We don't hold traditional hours of the team. When we all need to get together, we'll be able to get together. And now you can do so even more frequently, right, over Zoom. And so there is enough work for everyone that we will be working enough that make sure that you do take those times to take care of yourself in the midst of all this.
Well, and as a leader, right? I mean, if you have clarity and create accountability, then that sort of traditional work hours, if you will, you don't really have to check that box because people are clear on what they need to do to contribute and they're accountable against that.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself ever going back to coaching?
No idea. The good news about this is I guess I'm still young relatively, right?
You are.
But I feel like I always say if coaching were done in dog years, then I've done it as a head coach for a long time.
Sure.
And done it in two places that I think Butler was I always say it's the best college job in the country because we had such a great balance of, we all were aligned from board of trustees to faculty to president to athletic director to team to coaches about what that student athlete experience should look like. And getting to Boston, everybody in the organization is aligned on what our ambitions are and the fact that it's not going to be easy and we don't expect it to be easy. And we're going to ride the ups and downs together. So I've coached in two unbelievable places and I've really enjoyed the challenges that come with both. as I sit and watch practice here in the first few weeks of practice, I would say that there may be like 5% of me that would interject or would say something that is like anxious or wants to. I'm not for a number of reasons, but I would say that the other 95% of me is just enjoying watching someone else do it, who is excellent, going to college practices and watching other people do it that are excellent, and not losing sleep over the body position that was wrong in one drill in the fourth segment of practice. So the 10,000 foot view has its advantages.
I bet. You know, last year you were coaching in the bubble, right? What was that experience like for you personally, right? Was there anything that you learned maybe about yourself or something that you did maybe differently there that you'll take with you moving forward?
Well, going into it, I was really concerned about the number one concern for me was the mental wellness of everybody going. And I made it pretty clear to the NBA on several occasions. So I thought that this challenge was more than I think meets the eye for the teams that were going to be there the longest. And, you know, I think that they did everything that they could. And at the same time, I think that, you know, it was still a big challenge. So we went in with the idea that we were going to use this platform to inspire. We were going to compete together, and we were going to try to share joy. Like we were getting a chance to practice every day in the middle of a pandemic when other people weren't allowed to congregate inside. So there were some benefits to that for sure. But it's funny, you go back to Angela Duckworth. I called Angela. Angela's been a good friend for a long time. And I called her before we went to the bubble and just said, what do you think of all this?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you approach this from the perspective of helping people navigate it and, you know, helping me navigate it? And she said, the number one thing is it's going to be hard at first. And she was right. It was hard at first, especially those first 36 hours when you're quarantined, when you're like looking at the walls of your room and you're like, I may be here for 90 days.
Right.
And, you know, we were there right.
Almost
90 days. And I wish we would have been there 104, whatever the Lakers were.
Right.
That was the best of all of them. But then there are going to be ups and downs. Like you're going to have moments where, you know, you find a great jolt, and you're going to have moments where you're really down. And if you can just understand that, be alert to that, and be ready to navigate that and be in tune to that, that's really important. And then she said something that stuck with me that I just try to keep in my mind the whole time. And she said, of all the experiences you have in basketball, this would be what you tell your grandkids about. And so I thought, you know, for me, that was a huge motivator. And so I actually shared that with our team right when we got there. And just to try to keep that, you know, we always want to stay in the moment, have a growth mindset, all of those fun things. But also in that particular circumstance, you know, that to me was a big part of that. Was like, okay, this is really a short-term thing in the big picture of life, and a true blessing to get a chance to be together and to live this, you know, so unique situation.
It sort of heightened your level of awareness and sort of a greater purpose around this window of time at some level, I would imagine.
There's no question. I mean, obviously in the middle of a pandemic, but also with all of the opportunity to work and be out front on the social justice initiatives within the league and within all of our individual organizations at such a critical time, I thought was, you know, just an amazing opportunity to be a part of.
You know, Brad, you've been so generous with your time. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fires, and you just tell me what comes up. Does that sound good? What's your favorite book?
Yeah, Mindset by Carol Dweck would no question be the one that I always say.
Yeah, she's amazing. Best piece of leadership advice that you've ever been given?
Be yourself.
Most memorable career moment so far?
You know, I don't know. I don't get too, like, into those moments. I would say one of the most memorable career moments was having a 10-year reunion dinner with most of our 2010-11 team a couple weeks ago.
What's your favorite NBA player and team when you were growing up? I kind of have a sneaking suspicion I know this one.
Easy. Reggie Miller, Pacers.
Okay.
Everybody would think Bird because he was from Indiana with the Celtics and they were on TV all the time. But Reggie Miller, I wore 31 in high school. He was who I wanted to be.
Toughest player in the NBA to game plan against?
LeBron. He's game planning against you, and in the middle of the game, he can tweak his own plan. And there are some other super savvy, smart players that, aren't as good as him as far as physically, right? And can't dominate the game the way that he can. But if you're not on your toes with him, then you're probably in trouble anyways.
You're not the only guy out there that feels that way, right?
You still might be in trouble. That's right. He's had a remarkable run, but his savvy and his understanding of both ends of the floor and what other teams are trying to accomplish cannot be undersold.
What's a habit that's improved your life?
Walking.
What are you reading, watching, or listening to right now?
I've just finished Ted Lasso's second season.
That's awesome.
By far my favorite show. Yeah, I love it. I love everything about it. And I really like how they focused on mental health in the second segment of this, and in an attempt to, I think, normalize it through sports. It's a pretty cool thing.
I haven't seen it. I need to check that out.
No, it's an amazing show.
Okay. I'm checking it out. So the show's called Game Changer. So one last question. What game changer or who inspires you and why?
Well, I'd say there's so many. I would say for the purpose of where I am every day, where I walk in every day and seeing the banners outside my office, I would say all of the Celtics, all of the Celtics tradition and history would be that. But I'd say especially the teams in the 60s who, unfortunately we've lost a few of those great ones in the last few years, but the way that they competed, the way that they delivered, and more importantly, the relationships that they've continued to have all the way through the next decades of their life, to me, are what the team and what sports is about.
What an awesome conversation. Here are a couple of my favorite takeaways from this conversation with Brad. Number one, don't be afraid to reinvent yourself. It's not easy to take leaps that Brad has taken, right? Going from a successful mid-major college coach, a really successful mid-major college coach, to the NBA. Going from successful NBA coach to front office executive. Too often, we see people wait to reinvent their careers until they're forced to. See, that's the thing. Success, it can breed complacency. Don't be afraid to channel your drive and try something new, even if it means leaving something that's comfortable. One of the things I learned from the best athletes and coaches in the world is discomfort brings growth, right? When we get a little bit uncomfortable, we grow, and Brad is certainly a testament to that. Number two, hire people who are, I love this, humble, intelligent, and hardworking. Brad looks for three qualities in candidates when hiring for a role: humble, intelligent, and hardworking. How simple, clean, but good stuff. If you have those three things, you can close a lot of other gaps. Number three, find contentment in the pursuit. A lot of people talk about growth mindset in the context of facing adversity. I love how Brad emphasized that it's just as important to have that mindset when you're having success. Find contentment in the pursuit. Good stuff. Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. This episode was edited and sound designed by the team at Sound On Studios. You can find out more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. Check it out. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.